Let's take a look at these switches from a configuration point of view. The two switches we do have are the same physical model, but they do differ in their software capabilities. The one we do have here is the command line version capable switch, and the other one we have is the smart manage capable switch. Between them, they do both run the LAN base iOS feature set. They are both configured in similar ways by both having a web GUI interface that you see in front of you here, but the difference really is where the command line capable switch does give you configuration control from the local console or remote capabilities to manage that switch in the full iOS capabilities for engineers who want that choice. Whereas the smart manage switch is going to be really configured from the web interface that you do see here. So I do have the two switches loaded up here. The first one is a .210 IP address that is our appropriately named here, the CLI version of this switch. And then if we kick over to our other tab, it is the .220 series IP address, and it is the same switch, but the smart managed only version. I don't have a lot of things plugged into them just because these are running in our test environment, and we're just kind of using them for demonstration purposes. But if we move back and forth between these two tabs, you'll notice that, well, the interface is the same because it is. They're running the same code, the same feature functionality, and the same level of interface here, which, if you look at the tab description, actually is Cisco Configuration Professional preloaded on these switches, and that is how you traditionally would go and manage them, being the idea behind the Catalyst 1000 family. Across the interface, we'll kind of take a look through the different capabilities these switches do have from both monitoring, configurations, some of the depth of services, of course, your general settings you can do to get the switch with different roles administration, but everything you can really do from both this interface, and we will take a look at the console interface as well. So overall, when you first enter the switch, this is the dashboard that you will see to give you a summary of what's going on from the device at a port level and a hardware level as well. So we do have a few things plugged in, namely we do have our 24 ports available. Anything in gray just means the cable is not connected to a live endpoint. Port 2 actually is our uplink, and if you do mouse over a interface, it will show you some information about it, its speed and its status, and what port number it actually is. Port 23 here is going to a PC that we have to go and configure the port for functionality, but we do see that it is configured and connected to an endpoint. And then we do see this one in yellow actually does indicate that not only is the device connected, but also gives you a look at this port that is a PoE providing interface to an endpoint that actually happens to be an access point that is pulling 24.1 watts off of that interface. We can also see this hardware utilization of the switch itself, as well as some power and temperature variance for the switch. I do like this pie graph you do get of power consumption because not only do you get to see the interfaces that have the power on them, we do get to see how much is being drawn from the overall wattage bank. It does show 24.1 watts here, and then slightly over 345 watts remaining for the entirety of the PoE budget of this switch. Again, just notice that the switch model that you do have, how much budget will be afforded to it, and this does give you a representation as a countdown to how much might be remaining as you plug in access points, phones, and other endpoints that would draw power. If you look at the bottom view of this dashboard grid, we can see any critical events that may be happening, their severity level, status, and when they did come into our system. Good news is this switch does not have any of those such events. If we stay with the monitoring side, we can look at our ports at a little bit more granular detail. So moving back beyond just the overview we saw on the front dashboard page, we now get some finer points to understand that what is the port description, how was it configured, what was that IP address, does it have power draw against it, was it routed or access or trunked mode, and we do get that information up to 10 ports by default. We can scroll that out to more interfaces, or we know that we just want to see over the 24 that we have, and we can appropriately go in and assign those interfaces out, and we can see them at a quick glance, their traffic utilization, power draw, at a top to bottom 24 or 48 port view, depending on how you do want to split it out. And it does give us a client view as well. Right now, the clients we do have on here actually would be the uplink to our connecting switch, which actually is a 9200 series switch from this IP address, as well as the device that is drawing our PoE is our 9115 series access point, and it just gives us some information that it, yes, is on and drawing power, but I haven't done any real configuration of that port to give it a VLAN, and actually is why you don't see the other client on there that we saw from the main screen, port 23, did show it was connected, but because that port wasn't configured, it wasn't giving an IP address. It couldn't really resolve any client information because it, technically isn't actually an online device. So it does show us visually things are connected. This client view shows us what actually is on and configured, and now we have to go to work and actually make sure everything is where we need it to be. That's where we get into the configuration side. And I can do the configuration from the high-level switch management to make sure that we know how we're managing it. Its name of switch, very basic functionality. Any spanning tree functionality we do want to make sure is on or off in across our environment, and the VLANs we do have configured. Because it is running, a Cisco iOS LAN-based system, it does have the capability to join a VTP domain, and you can actually build that out for the system, which is a nice enterprise class feature you may want to take advantage of that is part of this switch solution set. If we do want to take advantage of the Bluetooth connection capability to manage our device, we can do that here as well. And these switches, as we showed, don't have any physical stacking interfaces on the back of the switches, like you might find in the Catalyst 9300 series to do a traditional data stack, linking these devices over high-speed connections to connect them as one style of interface. What we do have here is the ability for these devices to be horizontally stacked using their expansion interfaces. In this case, our 4 1 gigabit ports that are ports 25, 6, 7, and 8, which can be used to connect to other switches and make a horizontal stack, but just using the front ports instead of the rear stacking cable ports that just aren't present on this feature set. We can look at horizontal stacking in a future video. If we do go to the ports style interface, we now get the ability to go in and actually configure each individual interface for what we want it to do. Let's take a look at our uplink interface, and we can click on, simply enough, just that interface. We'll now move that black box around it to indicate we are looking at port 2, indicated by port 2 here. We can give it a description and then go into our port settings. Is it a routed interface? Do we want to make it a switched interface? What IP address do we want? And again, full LAN-based capabilities does give us a depth of advanced functionality if we want to take advantage of that as well into the series switch. If I look at my PoE port switch, we can go into port settings and make sure that we have port fast, which is turned on. Again, that gives us functionality for a little bit of PoE resiliency into that environment, and we do have that capability to turn on and make sure that that device is fully registered for power and network connectivity for what it is. This one actually is a switched interface, access mode, and across this VLAN we do want for it right now. If I wanted to configure multiple interfaces at one time and just do port ranges, for the GUI interface, we can simply click on a port. In this case, I'll choose 13. Hold down the control button of your keyboard and select a different interface, and now it will start grouping them together to make changes across a port range, much like you do in a command line fashion, an interface range group. We can now do here by just hitting Control-click to the number of interfaces we do want. And it will typically pop up a window that says, hey, a different configuration than what might be on port 1, 2, 3, 4, however many you configure, will be different than each other, and just gives you a little bit of a warning to say, hey, if we do that, we want to make sure the changes that we're applying are locked into these switch ports at the ready. For troubleshooting capabilities, we do have that available. We can do ping test, trace route, different diagnostics. We can reboot the switch, even set it to factory settings if need be. So we do have that capability to do a nice restart from the GUI, factory clear out if, again, we want to not go into the command line in this version of the switch. We want to make sure, especially in a smart managed switch, that those features are available within this interface. If we move into the VLAN configuration, we do get the ability to add and control and modify our VLANs and where they are associating across the board, different VLAN groups we can create, or like I mentioned before, we can join a VTP domain, and that's taken care of by that association right there. Once we do move to the services window, we now start getting more of that advanced feature functionality. The likes of static routing does support here as well. Simply enough, by clicking a add button, we go in and describe a little bit of information we need to create that route. It's all point and click. Radio buttons, drop downs, text fields to correlate and build those configurations out. If we want to take advantage of a routing protocol, in this case, LAN-based gives us the affording RIP functionality. We can do that here by clicking the Add button once again, pick your RIP version, network address, and functionality here. Now, in basic mode, you get that, but it does give you the toggle to do a more advanced mode if you had a little bit more control or desired different parameters into your route structure. You can do that by toggling the advanced structure up here. A nice capability we do get, because this is the command line version switch, is the ability to run commands from the GUI. Both exec commands and configure commands can be appropriated here. And if we just do, a show version, we'll do a run command by clicking the button, and it will output that result below by what version of software we're running in this environment, so we can see that without having to launch a remote command or be at the console of the switch. We can do that and run those commands, both config and exec, from the GUI, which is a powerful feature that gives you some of those more granular controls if you want to just stay in the GUI interface, if it's more familiar to those technicians. Then you get into levels of security, access control lists, different functionalities we can start really building out into our environment. Again, it is a full iOS robust, capable switch from Cisco. Your QoS policies, again, we can add across the board, and really helps us define what type of ports and access we want to build out our quality of service, build out the policies, and then assign it across the board. So it's very flow-driven, is very laid out very well, so you know how you're configuring something, how that's applied, and to do that is a very straightforward process. Again, all point-click radio buttons and drop-downs to configure those settings. From the general settings, again, we do get to have basic device management and access credentials. Do we want secure only, open HTTP, all the different parameters we want to make sure how our management is able to be done. We can choose how we want to use the software update functionality. We can lock it into a web user interface only, or we can actually have it done by the iOS and web user interface, depending on your style and credential access that you may want for these users to go and update these devices. Again, role-based administration is available as well, different privilege levels. You can have, lockdown, a few read-onlys, depending on how you want to configure your system. Again, the showing off here the capabilities of this interface driven by the Config Professionals software native to these devices. Now, if I do move from the command line version of this hardware switch into the smart managed only version of the switch, it is the exact same look and feel. You didn't notice anything as I move between tabs. It was a seamless look because it's, well, the same software. The main difference that you get in here would really be within the services section, some of those advanced functionalities. We notice that we're missing that CLI button, right? So we cannot run any config commands or any commands for a command line from the web GUI. Well, it is a smart managed capable switch, so it's going to not give you that functionality that you would be afforded if you purchased the command line capable switch. Other than that, the rest of the switch functionality is exactly the same as you've seen it from the interface we've been showing you up to this point. Now let's take a look at the console interfaces of these two switches. We do have both of them loaded here, and the first one we will log into will be our command line capable switch. And for this one, we have properly named it the Catalyst 1000-CLI, indicating this is a configurable CLI model. And we'll also log into our other switch. This switch is named Cat1K-Smart, indicating it is the Smart Managed Switch. So both of these do have a console interface, but really what sets these switches apart, when you look at the configuration command options, you can see a full list of all the capabilities you can both view and manage with this switch. But the important one here on our CLI name switch is we do have this configuration capable option. If we do a similar command show on the smart enabled switch, we will notice that there is no configuration option loaded here. That means for the smart enabled switch, you have the ability to get into the console interface, but you don't have any additional configuration capabilities you can do from this interface. Well, the command line full configurable capable switch does include this option, so we can get into our configuration terminal and go about configuring feature functionality from the console access, whether it be directly connected or remote accessible. We can actually go in and make changes to the IP addresses, the interfaces, the VLANs, the routing. You have that functionality available in two different modes on that configurable CLI full switch edition. You can do the GUI if that's where you want to stay, or you do have that full configuration option within the console interface for this edition of the Catalyst 1000 series. If we, again, go back into the smart managed switch, knowing that we don't have that capability, that just means we really need to take a stance to indicate that, I have a conscious decision that while I can see some read-only commands and understand I can look at how the configuration is set up from this interface, I can't make any changes at this level. So that might be something that's good for environments where you may not have a full comfort of the iOS configuration commands, or staff that doesn't have a lot of experience with the iOS to make those changes. You may say it's great that I can have the GUI interface available within that switch model. And if I wanted to go and just do some double checks, I can do my basic show commands and see that information on the smart managed switch. But truly, if you wanted that ability to have both means of access, maybe you are very comfortable in iOS from existing switch infrastructures or other purchases, and you've grown up under that terminology, you would be recommended to kind of have that option to say, yes, GUI is there, which I can do in everything we've shown up to this point, but I also have that full configuration command at my disposal, whether I console into it directly for setup or if I remote into it as well, I can read and write commands into that switch model. Now, beyond that, within the interface of both switches, but I'll focus on the smart switch here, you do have capabilities that allow you to go back in and do a certain number of things for viewing the switch details. But one nice thing you get to do as well is run this setup command. So if you need to restart the switch, or for some reason you got locked out of the GUI or couldn't get into it, but knew how to get into the console access, its commands and setup, you can actually go in and run this setup command, and this will actually restart the day zero configuration wizard. Essentially sets the switch back to config defaults, but allows you to go back in there and set up the switch from day zero again. Or if for some reason the switch wasn't behaving properly out of the box, you do have that console access to go and run that setup command to start that DHCP pool of the one network to get into configuring that switch, maybe back from the GUI within this generation. So you can kickstart that day zero configuration, then hop back to the GUI to make your changes as responds to that smart switch option. So that is one factor where these two switches really do divide, right? So the GUI is similar, the console is similar, but because the Smart Manage does not include a configure option for configure terminal style, you do lose that level of access and capability in that switch. So really be cognizant of that when you're looking at making your purchases, because that is, I guess we'll say, the killer feature of that command line version. One thing that I do want to show off that we do have available is when you are at these switches at the day zero configuration, it does put you into a nice guided GUI, right? So you do get to go to your standard 192.168.1.1 IP address, and it will also auto-generate a management DHCP pool for a .1 IP address structure. So when you do plug in the switch for the first time and you boot it up, you can plug in a PC into typically port 1. It'll get an IP address automatically assigned from the switch for one net IP address, and then you go into the default 1.1 range, and now you can go and manage and configure your switch parameters for what you need to do from the web GUI in the smart switch or the command line switch. But again, the command line will give you another level into the switch if you didn't want to use that type of setup. If for some reason you said, hey, that wasn't working, or I need to change something and I need to reset the switch but get back to that day zero configuration, looking at the smart switch, you can actually run the setup command, and that will actually reinitiate that day zero configuration to start up again, reload the IP address pool, and reset the VLAN 1 to be an active interface at 192.168.1.1, and then give you that capability back into the switch before you go in and make changes at a factory level. So you can run that setup command from the console. You can do a factory reset from the GUI, but it is a nice feature to go in there and actually help with that management structure, especially in the Smart Manage switch, to get that back up and running at the day zero config window, where again, if you did go into the full command line version and you said, hey, I can do it all myself from the command line, you do have that config terminal mode to really go in there and do that. So that's really what I want to show you in this overview of the Catalyst 1000 series. My recommendation going through this and playing with the two switches, because they're so similar across the board from a management structure, I do recommend the command line version just because it is a nice helper. It's very familiar if you have that knowledge to how to configure a switch, because if you somehow lost your bearings in the web GUI, as intuitive as it may be, you said, maybe I'm more proficient in doing those port ranges from the command line. You do have that capability to do that from the command line capable switch. If you went the Smart Managed only version and you wanted to go into, I guess, like the back door to configure it that wasn't just the GUI, you really lose that extra capability by not having that configuration enablement available to you in that model. So depends on your IT staff audience. If you are comfortable going with command line and you know that realm and you want to add that layer, but also want that benefit of web GUI, I would stress going that direction. If you truly just want a GUI only experience and know that maybe I can monitor a little bit from the console interface, but I really can't configure anything as a backdoor or another way into the switch, the web managed version could be a good option there. But my recommendation would really be the command line version. Just peace of mind, having that depth of Cisco iOS available at your fingertips from that console is a nice thing to have while benefited by that GUI. Hope this was beneficial, and look forward to seeing you on future series.